Aaron Salzberg. I'm the director of the Water Institute at the University of North Carolina. And on behalf of myself, Kata Liang, all the staff at the Water Institute, welcome to the 5th day of the UNC Water and Health Conference. For those of you who've been with us all week, thank you. You may have lost a little bit of track of time and space. This is Friday, October 18th. Our focus is on achieving the last mile in high-income countries. For those of you who are just joining us, so we've got a number of folks who are just coming in today. The Water and Health Conference has now become the world's largest international conference on water and health. And so we're very excited about that. It's hosted by the Water Institute here at UNC, and this will be a little repetitious for those of you who are with us on day one, so I apologize, but bear with me. The goal of the Water Institute is to promote water security through research, policy, and practice. And our tagline is that we want to improve the way the world works on water. And we often talk internally about this in a 4-step process. The first is, can we identify a problem that matters? The second, can we develop a solution? The third, can we demonstrate that that solution works in the environment in which those problems exist? And step 4, if we actually have a solution to a problem that matters, that works within the context that that problem exists, how do we get everybody else to start doing it? How do we scale up its application? How do we integrate that science into policy and into practice? In other words, that translation process is what we are all about, and that's what this conference is all about. The goal of the Water and Health Conference is to integrate that science and evidence into the work we do to catalyze greater, more effective, and more efficient action at scale so that we can deliver greater results for the people that we all serve, especially those most in need. We take great pride in our science and evidence. Many of you know, those of you who are new today, all the content that you'll see has been chosen through a double-blind, peer-reviewed process. We take great pride that we bring good science to all of you when you guys come and spend your time with us. When we say experience, we do mean experience of all kinds. No matter who you are or how you're connected to water and health, your experience is important to us and important to us here in the conference. Indigenous knowledge, the experiences of workers, lived experiences of those without access to wash services are all part of our understanding the behaviors, prejudices, systemic inequalities that impede service delivery and equality of access. Sharing these learnings and experiences across the divides of race, culture, history, wealth, meritocracy, opportunity, this is what makes this meeting unique. We've all checked our titles at the door, and that's critical to our success. We all engage equally. So welcome to everyone, and thank you all for being part of the conference and for contributing. Bart, can we put the sponsor slide up very quickly? I do want to thank those who have been with us all week. Know this, we do this every day. We could not do this conference without all of them, and we definitely want to thank the Osprey Foundation, the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, and RTI International for their support, Chemonics, World Vision, Business Connect, and P&G. We especially want to thank RTI International for their sponsorship of today and the work that you'll see going on here. I do also want to thank, as you go through the day, we have a number of thematic sessions that were prepared by a group of experts, and so I do want to thank UNC, Joe, and many others. I want to thank RTI, IATMOS, CDC, EPA, North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, Dig Deep, NSF International, the Environmental Finance Center at UNC, North Carolina, DHHS, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and the Center for Water Security and Cooperation. They all helped us curate the content that you'll be getting throughout the rest of the day, so we're very excited about that. Okay, we have an extremely ambitious agenda for today, so let's get right to it. Hopefully you all have programs. At the end of today's program, today's plenary, we'll go through some announcements to orient you to the rest of the day. But without further ado, I'd like to invite up Nancy Messonnier, Dean of the Gilling School of Global Public Health, to introduce our opening speaker.
Morning, everybody. Thank you, Aaron. Congratulations on yet another successful Water and Health Conference. I'm grateful to be here today on the final day, excited to enjoy the program with you, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. For more than 50 years, The U.S. EPA has been dedicated to protecting public health and the environment. Academic researchers, including many who are in the audience today, always have been key partners with the agency, working hand in hand on solutions to air and water quality challenges. When I arrived at UNC in the fall of 2022, I had just missed the opportunity to work with Michael Regan during his time as Secretary of North Carolina's Department of Environmental Quality, or DEQ. Fortunately for all of us, he had already taken on an even greater challenge. Taking the helm of EPA in the spring of 2021, the administrator faced a nation grappling with the impacts of the pandemic and efforts to restore the agency's scientific credibility. In his time as administrator, he has reinvigorated EPA's efforts to address climate change, environmental justice, and clean energy. Before his work at the EPA, Administrator Regan made significant strides here at North Carolina as the DEQ Secretary, where he led initiatives on climate change, secured the largest coal ash cleanup in U.S. history, and tackled the long-standing PFAS contamination in the Cape Fear River. Scientists and engineers across UNC and other research institutions are proud to partner with DEQ on many of these efforts. As a North Carolinian native with degrees from North Carolina A&T and George Washington University, he brings local roots and national impact to his work. Administrator Regan, it's an honor to welcome you today. The Natural Resources Defense Council has rightly described you as, quote, a seasoned fighter for clean energy and a champion for environmental justice. We deeply appreciate your leadership, and we're eager to hear your insights at this year's conference.
Good morning. Thank you. I really appreciate you. Appreciate your leadership, Cindy. Good to see you. Good to see you too.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of people don't realize how hard those jobs are. We appreciate that, and I do, so thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
No, and I appreciate you taking time to be with us today. Hopefully you heard a little bit about our conference, so you know who we are, but we're all very excited to have you for a few minutes, and I know you've got a busy schedule. Maybe first, because we have a lot of students in the room, and maybe they're curious, but I know I certainly am. Maybe you can tell us a little bit just about your background and how you ended up as the administrator of EPA.
Oh, well, it definitely wasn't planned. I grew up in eastern North Carolina, hunting and fishing with my father and grandfather. So I've always loved the outdoors and the environment. But I also grew up with symptoms akin to asthma. And so on those high ozone action days or high pollution days, I was unable to join them. And that was a little bit of a internal friction for me, is why am I being punished from a health standpoint and not spending time with my father and grandfather? So I've always really understood the connection between natural resources and public health. My mother finally retired after 40 years as a nurse. So, you know, I understood a little bit about public health, and my father was an agricultural extension agent before retiring from the North Carolina National Guard. So public service was something that we discussed from day one, and I pursued environmental science at A&T because I wanted to understand a little bit more about the impact of our natural resources and humanity. And I ended up at the last minute getting an internship at EPA. So I was an intern for about a summer, and then I joined a management internship program, and I ended up being at EPA for about 5 or 6 years before leaving. Worked at Environmental Defense Fund in the nonprofit sector and really enjoyed that. And then I joined Roy Cooper's administration as Secretary of DEQ. I think North Carolina is very representative of many of the challenges facing the country, whether it's cleaning up coal ash or tackling climate change or thinking about some of these pervasive chemicals that are in our water. And the way we collectively, I never want to take credit for this, but the way we collectively as a state, DEQ, academic institutions like UNC, our state and local partners, the way we tackled climate water quality and air quality issues and worked with a Democratic governor and a supermajority Republican legislature. At the time, the Biden administration said, we need this kind of approach nationwide. And so I was fortunate enough, lucky enough to interview well, and now my supervisor is the leader of the free world, and here we are.
And again, these are hard jobs. What do you find most rewarding about the job?
You know, I think the most rewarding portions of the job are really what's great about public service. I think just the collaboration with different organizations and individuals who want to lend their intellectual capacity for, as you mentioned earlier, solving hard problems. Right. You know, we only have one planet. And I know we tend to think about things at a local level. Sometimes some of us think about things at a national level, but I've been to 13 or 14 countries in the last 3.5 years as administrator, and we are connected globally. It's rewarding to see that we are making a difference locally, and some of us, UNC, EPA, we can export our technical experience and intellectual capacity all around the world and help people who are much worse off than we are from an environmental standpoint. So that's very, very rewarding. It's also rewarding to travel the country and just meet with young people who have yet to become cynical like some of us, and just have all sorts of ideas about how to solve some of these complex problems without immediately becoming mired in the politics or the reasons we can't do things. My son Matthew is 10. I'm very optimistic about the future, but young people sort of reignite that optimism. So when I think about the work that we all do collectively, helping people all around the world and connecting with young people in the optimism, it really makes the job fun.
Oh, that's great to hear. What are some of the challenges?
You know,
Only some.
I'll be an old fuddy-duddy and say that politics. We have the solutions. I think the president has been such a transformational leader in terms of looking at historic legislation that has finally given government agencies like mine the resources to begin to tackle some of these problems. When I think about the bipartisan infrastructure law, EPA received $50 billion to focus on water infrastructure. Now, most of us understand that water infrastructure needs are around $650–700 billion, but we received $50 billion to focus on water infrastructure. With those resources, we're able to partner with our state partners, pass those resources through, and apply those resources to local solutions. We need more resources. We need more partnerships, public-private partnerships. We need to do more of that, and we are. The problem are the partisan politics that we face as a society. The drama of Washington, D.C., the pettiness of some of our political solutions for policies, they benefit the theater while the public suffers. And so I think when you talk about difficulty, right, the problems and the challenges, as hard as they are, that's not the difficulty. The difficulty is being captured by a political system that is grinding entrepreneurship and creativity and partnership to a halt or slowing us down. And so I think just as a public servant, it's very difficult to sit and just have to waste time playing politics, right, to get some basic things done. Now, some of us get good at playing politics, and it's part of the job, but there's a lack of efficiency in the system to provide good, clean drinking water to every single person in this country because of partisan politics.
Great. All right, well, let's get down to some of those issues. Can you tell us a little bit about, we have a good international audience, a lot of people online from over 100 countries. Can you tell us a little bit about what the actual role of the EPA is?
You know, our mission is to protect the environment and public health. It's pretty basic, and it shouldn't be political. We are at the tip of the spear in terms of the president's vision for tackling the climate crisis. We're responsible for every single person in this country breathing clean air, drinking clean water, cleaning up our contaminated lands, and making sure that we respect tribal sovereignty and really focus on justice, equity, and inclusion so that everyone can participate in this experiment we call democracy. And I joke with Janet Yellen at Treasury, I don't quite have the challenge of motivating my staff like maybe she does with the IRS. People work at EPA because they love what they do. They're scientists, they're engineers, they're lawyers, they're accountants, they're economists. They show up every single day because they're trying to make a difference in this world. And they understand our statutory and legal obligations, and they understand the joy that we bring to families when they do have the confidence to turn on their tap and can drink their water. So it's a great mission. I have a great organization with a motivated team, and it is something that countries around the world take notice of. When we travel around the world, we are in a position to work with, whether it's A&T or UNC, to create these relationships, especially with other universities, and just being able to export our technical experience and intellectual capacity, but also receive from other countries, is something that the agency takes a lot of pride in. So I've really bolstered our international presence at EPA over the last 3.5 years because the president pledged on day one that we would re-enter the global conversation around climate change, clean air, clean water, and we would re-emerge as global leaders. And we're trying to do that every single day.
Well, I'm excited to hear that. First, that Janet Yellen has a sense of humor, and second, that when I was in government, I led the development of the U.S. Global Water Strategy, and one of the things I had a lot of concerns about was we weren't deploying our expertise and knowledge globally, and that there really was a huge opportunity for us to reshape how the world works on water. And so it's wonderful to hear that that's something that's happening. Can you describe a little bit how Americans get their drinking water, and how would you characterize the state of America's drinking water?
90% of people in this country get their drinking water from a public drinking water system. I would say that EPA estimates that about 93% of people who receive drinking water from public water sources are meeting or exceeding EPA standards. So we still have a lot of work to do. We also have a lot of individuals in this country who are on private well systems. And so we really take our job very seriously. I think about the president and I spent some time flying over Asheville recently in western North Carolina. As the search and rescue continues, EPA is positioned to retrieve all of those maybe unlabeled contaminants in the water, whether it be through canisters or thinking about how we clean up the sheens and the like, and really begin to work with the local utilities on getting those systems back up, those drinking water systems and those wastewater systems. And while that is a significant challenge in itself, at least we know what we're working towards. In western North Carolina, there are about 20,000 plus individuals who get their drinking water from private wells. And most of those private wells were overrun with floodwaters that were contaminated with just about everything you can imagine. And so We have a mobile laboratory and labs around the country that are helping these people sample those private wells. At the same time, we're trying to get the physical water infrastructure back up and running. We do this all over the country. And not to, again, be partisan, but one of the things that scares me about things like Project 2025 is when you read these documents, you see the gutting of an agency that provides these services, not only to North Carolinians, but all around the country and the world.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks don't understand how indigenous communities are set up here in the United States and the fact that they're not on the same system, so to speak. Are there unique challenges associated with the access that they have?
There are. You know, one of the things that the president really impressed upon us on day one is to really strengthen our nation-to-nation relationship with our indigenous population here in the United States and respect tribal sovereignty. And so we have a similar relationship with the tribes that we have with each individual state, which is we have federal water standards, but we delegate certain authorities to the state or to the tribal nations, and we provide technical assistance to help ensure that they are receiving clean drinking water. It's a different relationship. Sometimes it's a relationship that is really tested. But at the end of the day, I believe that we are doing a great job in reestablishing that partnership. And with that $50 billion that we're distributing to the states, we're also distributing significant resources to the tribes as well. I'm very proud to say that just recently, this is sort of not a water issue, but a climate issue. We announced a multi-billion-dollar program focused on tackling climate issues, climate pollution reduction grants, and these grants were given to local leaders to solve the climate crisis from a local perspective, and we awarded our tribal partners about $300 million to participate in that program as well. So everything that we do from a federal perspective with our state partners, we're bolstering and trying to have a similar relationship with the tribal communities. Many of them welcome that, and we have great relationships. And for those who are skeptical, we are continuing to try to build those relationships.
Great. You mentioned some of the chemical contamination in the western parts of North Carolina that you're dealing with now. We know that there are probably close to 100,000 chemicals that are being used or manufactured here in the United States. Many of these have likely found their ways into our drinking water. How does EPA go about identifying the chemicals or other pathogens that might pose a threat to human health or the environment? And what do you see as the most critical emerging threats and why?
Yeah, you know, this is one of these situations where really it's an all-hands-on-deck approach. The Safe Drinking Water Act and other federal authorities that we have help us to identify these threats and begin a process to list these chemicals and set drinking water standards. We depend on other federal agencies to help with the scientific analysis and the identification of these harmful threats. And then we go about the business of enforcing those drinking water laws. It's very challenging because I think for a long time in this country, we have not dedicated the proper resources to ensuring that our drinking water is safe and secure for everyone in this country. You know, not only do we have drinking water threats from over 100,000 potential chemicals, but we also have cybersecurity threats, and then we just have a lack of investment into our infrastructure, and the climate crisis is really taking a toll and stressing our drinking water system. So we're sort of doing all of the above. We're investing resources to strengthen the infrastructure. We're partnering with the National Security Council and other security agencies to be sure that we have the right protocols in place to protect our drinking water from nefarious actors that are constantly attacking our drinking water system, because from an international perspective, people understand how vulnerable it is. And then we have the Safe Drinking Water Act, where we really focus on the chemical contamination. As you all can probably imagine, I am really concerned with the pervasive nature of PFAS and other chemical contaminants that have just been dumped into our waters for decades. We understand the threat, and trying to list those chemicals and regulate those chemicals in a way that the courts will respect that has been an uphill battle. We are doing better than I thought in terms of winning court cases at the Supreme Court and in the lower courts. But the only way we can really prevail is if we measure twice and cut once, which really slows down the process. And so to understand as professionals that there are threats to our drinking water, and because we have a court system today that has been less friendly to federal agencies, it is really slowing us down, but we're very committed to ensuring that there is safe drinking water, affordable drinking water for every person in this country. And I think the way that we supercharge this process is that we don't go it alone. EPA must partner with our state and local governments. We must partner with our researchers and our academic institutions. And we must bring the full force of this collective to solutions so that when we set our regulations, we have a fighting chance to have those regulations survive. The last thing I'll say is it is mind-blowing to me that certain companies in this country, like Chemours and 3M and DuPont, have not taken responsibility, refused to take responsibility, and they have more research than we do in the general public. And so it's very important that we collectively have conversations like this, because it's going to take all of us to really wrestle these problems and ensure that our children and our grandchildren aren't drinking some of the same contaminated water that we know some of our citizens are now today.
Yeah, that's a challenge for another discussion about many of these companies who understood these risks as they were producing, manufacturing, and distributing these compounds for decades.
Yes.
And it's only after the fact that we're able to try to regulate. Maybe it would help for some people to understand, you mentioned the courts. How do the courts actually get involved in your regulatory process? And has that changed recently?
Yeah, it absolutely has changed. There was a time where Congress, through statutory authority and legislation, gave agencies the authority and the ability to execute on the intent of Congress's will. And so for 50 years, EPA has been partnering with individuals like yourselves, and we have built an institutional knowledge that matches the science, the data, the engineering to develop solutions. And the Supreme Court just ruled through Loper Bright that, maybe the courts should make some of these decisions instead of agencies that are partnering with some of the brightest minds in the world. I believe fully that is an intrusion on not just the agency's ability to protect public health, it's an intrusion on the will of Congress. And I have been arguing to some of our congressional delegation that they should really take exception to the courts stepping in and doing their job as well as ours. So it goes back to that old adage at EPA, we're having to measure twice, cut once. Some of the things that academicians and environmentalists and nonprofits, some of the things that they would like for us to do to push the envelope so that we are fully protective of public health and the environment, some of those things we have to really be very careful about. Because what is happening is, as we push the envelope, at EPA, we know everything we do, we're going to be sued on day one. I mean, everything we do. It's not that we're in a crouched position, but we just know on day one, you will get a lawsuit from someone, and you have to be able to defend that. And we've always enjoyed the challenge. That being said, what we've seen with the courts as of late is someone will bring a suit against EPA, and we will attempt to defend that regulation in court, and the courts will decide that they want to go even further than those who are litigating against us. And when we think about some of our regulations, like waters of the U.S., the Supreme Court actually went further than those who disagreed with our assumptions about how we protect our wetlands and our precosins. And so that's a long way of me saying we are still being very aggressive, innovative, and entrepreneurial, but in the back of all of our minds, we feel this huge responsibility to understand the risks are very different now when these cases go to court. And I just think that eventually something will have to change because we won't be able to make progress as quickly as we would like. And at the end of the day, this is why leadership matters and why those who are elected to represent us should actually represent us, the will of the people.
Yeah, I think when you set these standards, these are it's very technical processes. There's a lot that's going into this, and we're talking about interactions between very complex systems, and it takes a lot to demonstrate them. There's a lot of uncertainty, but there's some uncertainty you can explain, some you might not be able to. Where do you, I mean, is this going to require a more educated judiciary, or is this incumbent upon you to lay out the science in a different, more structured way that gets you to where you need to go, a combination of both?
It's a combination of both.
Okay.
I'll give you a good example. When the president walked into office, one of the first things he said to me was, we have to remove 100% of the lead pipes in this country. We understand and we know that there is absolutely no acceptable level of lead. And as part of the $50 billion, there were about 14 to $15 billion carved out specifically to remove lead pipes. The only way we could get to that 100% is the investment of that $15 billion plus regulations. And so we have been working for 3 years to develop a regulation, the lead and copper rule, that would push municipalities to have the lead pipes removed within a 10-year window. Under normal circumstances, because certain cities like Chicago and Detroit and others have a really significant challenge. And so typically behind the scenes, you see the lobbyists and those municipalities really pushing EPA and fighting hard, saying there's absolutely no way we can remove the lead within a 10-year window. Mind you, we all know that there are 9 million lead pipes, or 9 million lead service lines in this country. So right now, today, there are 9 million Americans and people in this country who potentially are being poisoned by lead, and we get pushback from the water utilities and some lobbyists from some cities who say 10 years is too fast. Without the public outcry and the education, there is absolutely no way that EPA could achieve these goals. But because the public is educated on the dangers of lead, and there are campaigns all around this country, and the unfortunate incident of Flint, Michigan, it made it easier for us to push a very aggressive piece of regulation that could withstand some of the politics of the day. It makes me uncomfortable to say that we need for the public to be as educated on these forever chemicals and other chemicals if the agency is going to be as successful on those chemicals as we've been on removing lead pipes. And so it's an all of the above strategy. We need the agencies at the federal, state, and local level. We need academic institutions and researchers. We need nonprofits and advocates to really begin to have a broader conversation about the fragility of our water infrastructure and water quality in the United States of America. And I applaud you all for doing that, not just domestically, but globally. These conversations and the work that you all are doing, I tell you, it's so important because, you know, I've been to 14 or 15 states with the vice president just focused on lead. And she and I have had too many conversations with too many mothers with their children standing right beside them that have been lead poisoned, and their cognitive abilities have been permanently damaged. And this is happening on a daily basis in the United States of America. So we really need to have these conversations, and you all have to go out, spread the word, and partner with everyone you can to really raise awareness on the dangers of some aspects of our drinking water.
Great. And I think you've got a lot of fans of the lead and copper rule here. What can we, are there tools or instruments that EPA is bringing to bear that help some of the communities that might not have the resources to address this problem? Are there special instruments that are coming on board that are supporting the implementation of the lead and copper rule?
Yeah, I would say that in general, and I really do credit the president and the vice president for this, because I won't go through the boring acronyms, but they were able to pass some pretty historic legislation. And so typically, and I've talked to all of my predecessors about this, typically EPA is viewed simply as a regulatory machine. That's a very powerful tool, but we regulate and we enforce the laws. Thanks to the president and the vice president's leadership, Congress gave EPA about $100 billion to spend within a 5-year window to enhance our ability to protect air quality, water quality, tackle the climate crisis, but most of that is through grants that we can provide to our partners. So to answer your question directly, absolutely. We have billions of dollars now that we're pushing down to our state partners, mayors, nonprofits, organizations that have never had a seat at the table, organizations that used to fight for $10 and $20 and $30,000 grants are now getting $10 million grants to do the work in their communities. And so along with our enforcement ability and our regulations, we're now arming our partners with tens of millions of dollars to begin to crank up local solutions that really can reduce some of these threats much quicker. This is not your father's EPA, is what I like to say. It's a different organization today. And I'm hopeful that Congress will not perceive what we've done in the last 3.5 years as overstepping our authority. Some of them say this from a rhetorical standpoint, but the reality is that of this $100 billion, more than 50% is actually going to people in red districts. Because when you're trying to save people, you don't really ask them what their political affiliation is. You just go to the places that have the most need and you apply the solutions. And so what I'm hopeful is when Congress looks at this first term, they will see that it's not just regulations and enforcement that are driving these solutions, but it's local innovation through some of these grants that EPA now is able to provide.
Now, that may be an answer to the next question, but I'll ask it anyway. You come from a state where there's still a lot of people on private services, and a lot of that exists in low-income, Black, Indigenous communities, other communities of color. What are some of those unique challenges associated with reaching those areas that they're not on municipal services? And what special actions do you think we need to take to be able to expand service into those hard-to-reach areas?
Yeah, I think, the real challenge there really is the lack of infrastructure in itself. In 2021, I visited Lowndes County, Alabama, and it was there, I had no idea, but it was there that I discovered that they just lacked basic wastewater infrastructure. I also found out that about 30% of that county either had previously or at the time had exposure to hookworm. And this was something that I thought was not a problem in the United States of America. And so, again, going back to the $100+ billion that the president was able to give to EPA, there were also hundreds of billions of dollars given to USDA. And so we partner with USDA and their rural experts to reach some of these neighborhoods and communities that didn't have access to basic infrastructure for drinking water and wastewater. The way we do that is think about a whole of government approach and try to leverage all of our agencies to reach those who don't have access to clean drinking water and access to wastewater. In addition to that, the Inflation Reduction Act gave us about $3 billion to award to environmental justice communities to solve local problems. And so the short answer is leveraging the resources of other agencies who have a similar mission from a regulatory standpoint and enforcement standpoint, but also using these billions of dollars from the historic legislation that the president passed with Congress, some of it in a very bipartisan way. That is the way we will reach these individuals. There are a lot of people who are on private wells in this country, and quite frankly, they're on private wells for a reason. They want to be on private wells. It is a source of freedom. It's an opportunity for them to use their lands that they purchased or inherited the way they see fit. And we believe that everyone should have access to clean drinking water. And so through those grants and through testing opportunities, we want to provide them clean drinking water. It's a huge challenge. Again, I've articulated that there are about $650 to $700 billion worth of water infrastructure needs in this country for states and for tribes. And we've only got about $50 billion to distribute from a water standpoint. And that's why we have to use other resources to kind of marry with those solutions. But EPA can't do it alone. We're having to rely on our states to be creative, again, our academic institutions to help us with advanced testing methods, and departments like USDA and others to really help us to close that gap. And that's just domestically. You know, when I travel to other countries and you spend time in Indonesia, India, Ghana, Mozambique, it is there that you begin to see some of these challenges in a way that really are sobering. And so as some of us in this country are just getting across the finish line, just getting clean water for the first time. I think it's important that as soon as we get these communities online, we're thinking about how we export the intellectual capacity and technology and resources to others around the world that need this. And the last thing I'll say is this water challenge has been there for a long time, and we're trying to tackle it to the best of our ability, but this climate crisis is stressing this situation in ways that I don't think many of us imagined, and we're definitely not as prepared for it as we would like.
Say more. What do you mean specifically? How do you see climate change impacting your mission?
I'll just give you a very real example. In 2020, there was a pretty intense storm, not the worst storm in the world, but a pretty intense storm that hit Jackson, Mississippi. And Jackson, Mississippi already had a failing water infrastructure. Many parts of the city were on boil water notices for frequently. I'll share with you that I have one of my deputy chiefs of staff at EPA is from Jackson, Mississippi. I won't give her age, but she's under 40. And for her entire life while living in Jackson, boil water notices were all that they knew. This was something that was common. So in 2020, a storm came through, again, not the biggest storm, and it left 190,000 citizens in Jackson without access to clean water. There are so many cities across the country that are hanging by a thread. And as these storms become more intense, more frequent, it is really stressing these systems, and it is really a shame that in 2024, we have such a threat to our water infrastructure. Now, we're making up for lost time, and I'm very proud of that. But we are already attempting to tackle this issue of chemical contaminants, and making sure that the systems that are online are clean. If we see a lot of storms like Milton and Helene hit this country as frequently as we're starting to see, cybersecurity won't be the only thing we have to worry about.
Right. How do you see the science and research community supporting your mission?
Oh, it's so important. Because I'll answer this question with where I started, which is some of this sounds doom and gloom. The solutions are here. The will of the people is here. We need to get our politics to match that. In order for EPA to move as quickly as we need to, it's very important that the science and the research that we can't do comes from our academic institutions and our partners. When we are presented with that science, it bolsters our ability and the stringency by which we can regulate these potential pollutants. And there's just no way the agency can do it alone. So if we want to move as fast as the public deserves, and if we want to respond to this sense of urgency, EPA must find every single partner that it can. And there is no better partner than having partners that understand sound science and how to apply that sound science to protect public health. That is something that you all do every single day, and we are extremely grateful for that.
Okay, so one last question, and let's put the current elections aside. What keeps you up at night?
I think the thing that keeps me going is not letting down our young people, not letting down my son, Matthew. Because we fully understand the challenges that we face. And I truly believe that we can tackle all of these challenges, even the politics. We'll figure it out. But it's important to me that I know that I've given it my all every single day and set an example, because it takes all of us. And so I would say that none of us should be completely comfortable. All of us should be chasing something. And that something is leaving things better than we found it. And so I think the thing that keeps me going or keeps me up is making sure that we all are doing what we collectively can to protect this planet and protect as many people as possible.
Administrator Reagan.
Thank
you so much.
Yes.
No, it was a real pleasure. Real pleasure.